Hello and welcome to Vote Catholic. This is a town hall panel discussion on the voting rights and responsibilities of Catholics in the United States using the USCCB's document, Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship as a Guide. Real quick house cleaning, cell phones off, restrooms for audience outside. Father Matthew, would you lead us in prayer?
All right. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Dear Lord, we wish to be one nation under God. We wish that we follow your will, and we wish that you be with us as we walk through the roads of time. We trust you as a Father to lead us and to give us the grace we need. And therefore we say the Lord's Prayer, Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
All right, welcome again. My name is Matt Coons. Quickly about me, my wife Rodon and I have been attending St. Brendan's Catholic Church since 2001, and I attended the University of Notre Dame where I played football for the Irish, and I'm a financial advisor and author of 5 books. I'm also a former city councilman in the city of Milton, Georgia, and that's why they asked me to talk about some politics tonight, where I served from 2012 through 2019, and I will be the moderator for tonight, so I don't have to get grilled like I normally do. You guys do. So, I first want to thank those guests that are present here with us tonight, and all of you also that have joined us online. I want to thank Father Matthew Van Sporsberg and St. Brendan's Catholic Church in Cumming, which is in the Archdiocese of Atlanta, Georgia, for providing our venue this evening. I want to thank the many parishioners who helped organize this event, especially Scott Mackey and Don Conklin. And I want to thank our technical crew, Kyle Mackey and his wife Julie, who brought in all the equipment, and I know they put a lot of time. You should see the setup here to bring all of this to you. So I want to thank our panel as well, who graciously gave of their time to be with us this evening. But before I introduce our panel, I want to set some ground rules. First, we're not going to endorse any political candidate or political party this evening, and we will refrain from questions that name any particular candidate or party. What we are going to do is we're going to ask questions pertaining to what it means to have an informed conscience and what the Catholic Church teaches regarding voting and participating in government with the issues that we face today. We are also encouraging our audience, both online as well as here, if you are to ask questions. And if you're wondering something, you're probably not alone. You may help someone else out there who is wondering the same thing that you are, and so I encourage you to ask questions. For you in the audience, if you have a question, you've been given note cards, I believe. Please write it down and take it over to Scott and our technical table, and they will screen that and they will look at that and bring it on the TV for me to see. For those of you watching online, if you submit your questions via the chat feature online as well, we'll have someone scanning that regularly also, and I'll be notified when those questions come through. All questions will be screened per the rules above before given to our panel. So real quick, to our panel, I'll go one by one and introduce them for you. So Father Matthew Van Sporsberg was ordained a priest in 1994 and served on several vocational, educational, and spiritual roles throughout the United States. He came to be at St. Brendan's in 2012, where he's pastor, and he also serves as Vicar Forain for the North Metro Deanery of the Archdiocese of Atlanta. St. Brendan's has experienced tremendous growth under his leadership. We're about 3,800 families, and one of the things that he's done is accomplished renovation and construction for the church to serve those parish families for years to come. St. Brendan's will be one of the largest parishes in the state of Georgia under his leadership. Mary Boyert All right, Mary and her husband Tom are members of the St. Benedict Parish in Johns Creek, and Mary currently volunteers as treasurer and director of operations for Georgia Life Alliance. She recently retired from the Archdiocese of Atlanta, where she served as director of the Respect Life Ministry for 16 years. Previously, she served with Georgia Right to Life for 21 years, where she was education chairman, president, and executive director. She has been actively involved in the pro-life movement since the early 1970s. Inspired by one of her personal heroes, St. John Paul II, Mary has advocated for a culture of life in a variety of ways, mainly in the areas of education and public policy advocacy. She was influential in the passage of every piece of pro-life legislation passed in Georgia between 1980 and 2015, and to a slightly lesser degree the past few years. Patrick Metz, there he is. Patrick is a graduate of Franciscan University in Steubenville with a bachelor's in history and anthropology and a master's in counseling. Additionally, he has a master's of marriage and family from the Institute of John Paul II in Valencia, Spain. He currently works at the Archdiocese of Atlanta as the Associate Director of Family Life and Pastoral Care and assists the Metropolitan Tribunal as an expert witness with some of the petitions for annulment that require a psychological evaluation. He lives in Cumming with his wife Sarah and their 2 sons, and they are parishioners of St. Brendan the Navigator right here. YG Nightstorm is a man on a mission, all right? And he asked me specifically for all of you YouTube followers, 5,200 that are watching on his YouTube channel, on the Night Storm Nation, NYGHT Storm Nation.
Yeah.
He is blazing a trail, and he's blazing a big trail across the country, uniting Americans with the story of rising from homelessness in Atlanta and on food stamps to becoming a successful corporate executive through the grace of God, hard work, and the love from fellow Americans of all races and genders. YG serves as the director of the Defense of American Principles for the American Principles Project, APP, and national spokesman for the God, Guns, and Life Political Action Committee, challenging more American voters to boldly support God, family, and the dignity of all human life in the voting booth. Equipped with a gripping testimony of personal loss, YG confidently defends America's Judeo-Christian foundation in which God, our Creator, is recognized and that all lives have intrinsic worth in and out of the womb.
Amen to that.
Dr. Paul Thigpen. Dr. Paul Thigpen is the Director of Adult Faith Formation at St. Catherine of Siena Catholic Church in Kennesaw, Georgia. He is an award-winning journalist and the best-selling author of 54 books, and I've read several of them. They're very good. Paul has served as a professor of theology for several colleges and universities and as a member of the National Advisory Council for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. He and his wife, Lisa, recently celebrated their 41st wedding anniversary and are enjoying their 5 grandchildren. All right, Daniel West. All right, Daniel West currently serves the Archdiocese of Atlanta as Associate Director of Marriage and Natural Family Planning and part-time instructor for the Diaconate Formation Program. He graduated from Georgia Tech and then completed a master's degree in theology from the Franciscan University of Steubenville. He and his wife, Michelle, reside in Marietta with their 8 children and attend St. Catherine of Siena Catholic Church in Kennesaw. So that is our panel, and real quick, let's all give them a round of applause for this. All right, so let's begin. All right, so what we're going to be looking at is a document called Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. What is that? Father Matthew.
Well, it's a document put out by our Catholic bishops of the United States of America in order to help guide us in the self-education, I think, of the American citizen. Is the Catholic doesn't live in the Vatican. The Catholic lives out his life in the context of a nation. Therefore, he has to live in that communion with all the other Americans. And I believe that a Catholic has a mission to bring the spirit of the church to the greater society for its good. I think we're a great addition to the society although the society is not Catholic, we bring something to the table that brings value to the whole country.
When was the document created?
The document was created, about 10 years ago? The previous, it's been updated, it was recently updated by the bishops before the last election in 16. It was updated, and I believe it was before that as well. The previous 4 years before that.
So, Mary, maybe you can answer this because you have a copy in front of you. Right? So why would...
Well thumbed and highlighted.
So when it was created, what is the overall position about Catholics participating in the political process?
That is our call. That is our call as Catholics. We're answering our baptismal call to be involved in the political process. We're not supposed to hide under the limelight. We're supposed to be be in the world. And this document is really helpful for us to kind of give us a guideline as to where the church stands on the current issues that are facing us. And that's why they keep updating the document, because each time, usually around the time of the presidential election, whatever is the most current topics they'll cover. And they cover a lot of topics.
And so, Dr. Paul Thigpen, maybe some history on this. Was there any controversy in the creation of the documents, and how has it been received?
Like any document that's going to come out from the bishops, yes, there's controversy, in part because the principles that the Catholic Church teaches are not fully embraced by any party. And so you can't just say, here's the Catholic teaching, oh, that fits that agenda completely. So yeah, they got flack from kind of all kinds of political stripes, and of course, people with a document like that, they're always going to say, well, I wish you had said something about this. You can only say so much, but it is a remarkable document in many ways.
So, what specifically about it is the one thing that, if you were to look at that document, that you would have to that you would take away from it? What's the primary thing that you would see that really infects all of us?
Well, I would say that you can't have your Catholic faith separated from that aspect of your life. As a member of this society, as a citizen of the United States, that any attempt to try to convince ourselves that that's really, our faith is somehow separated from that. Our faith should not enter into that arena. If you read this document, take it seriously, you'll know that's not at all the case.
So, have other religions as well, like Protestants or Baptists or Jews, have a document similar to ours, or are we the only ones? Father Matthew, maybe you can answer that.
I don't know whether other churches or religious traditions have their own voter's guide.
Okay.
There are many organizations that have voter's guides. Private organizations, I would suspect that they do.
Don't know that any are as detailed as this one, but I do know, for instance, the United Methodist Church has, as a whole, their general conference has talked about certain kinds of things. The Southern Baptists have for sure, and my guess is other denominations have as well. I just don't know that any of their documents are as thorough and comprehensive as this one.
We don't know if they're separate from ours, or maybe they're taking some hints from ours as well. We don't know either that.
You never know. It happens. Yeah.
Everything kind of overlaps sometimes, right? Okay, and so based on this document, we're talking about forming our consciences. How does one go about that process? And maybe I'll ask one of our psychologists here, Patrick.
Well, I think it involves a lot of studying, right? You have to inform your conscience by reading about what the church teaches, because the church has a teaching on a lot of these issues that affect our lives and that are voted on in the social sphere. So we have to inform ourselves of the issues. We have to read about the church's teachings and why it teaches what it does, because there's good reason for it, because God wills our happiness, right? And He wants us to be fully alive and fully human. So reading about these teachings and then responding accordingly and in the voting booth can really have an impact. That's the hope.
I would mention that John Paul II, who was a real cultural leader, understood the power of trying to bring Christ to the world, and therefore that's why the wall fell. He had a theory on how culture is formed. He said there are two general spheres of influence that affect a culture. It's the law and economics. So however the law is and however economics works tends to affect the culture. The culture then tends to affect law and economics, and a Christian culture would continually be moving forward actually to improve, to be better and better and better in that dynamic. And I think that's part of how we are educated. We're not simply educated by some document, we're educated by our way of life. And that's why laws are so important, because they affect our way of life. That's why the economy is so important, because it affects our way of life. And so we all of us have to be aware how we vote, and we also have to be aware of how do we live out our economic lives, and how does it affect, for example, family? How does it affect our school? How does it, how does it affect our jobs? All those things are places we're educated, whether we know it or not. And that's why, for example, I would tell people they should be very involved in their schools, because that's going to affect the culture of their children, etc.
So when you make the, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, to pick up on what Patrick was saying too about forming conscience. So I think it's important to realize the scripture talks about how it's possible to have a seared conscience. That if we act in a certain way or allow our consciences to be malformed, that they become insensitive. And I think that's a big part of our culture is kind of there right now. We've allowed certain forces, influences to sear, to harden, to callous our consciences. And so to form conscience, one of the things we've got to do, as he was saying, is to read what the church teaches, but to also recognize that we may be startled by some of what the church has to say, because we may have fallen into just kind of accepting, because we're immersed in it all the time, what our culture says. And we have to realize that that has a deadening influence sometimes on culture when it's contrary to the gospel. So part of it has got to be, we've got to be open to God and say, okay, show me where my conscience is dead. Make it alive again.
Okay.
So I was going to write to you on this one, so go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on this. When you're talking about culture and conscience, one thing that I've been seeing, when people are always asking, why is the country the way it is? Why is our culture the way it is? And one particular young lady, I think I was in Kentucky, and she asked me, she said, YG, why is everything the way it is? How come people act like they don't know what our faith is about? How come people act like they don't know what they need to be doing as far as how our faith goes, as far as voting and how we should be able to project? And I asked her, I said, well, who have you talked to? See, it's quiet in here. And I asked her very specifically, I wasn't trying to kid around. I said, well, sister, who have you talked to? Who have you expressed and tried to educate about what's going on with our culture and how our faith can contrast against that and push that back and bring that love and that life of Jesus Christ? Who have you talked to? And she said, I haven't talked to anyone because I'm afraid to express myself that way because I don't want to piss people off. And I said, well, now you know why the country is messed up. Okay? So, we're going to be honest here, right? Can I be honest with people here? So now we know why the country is messed up, because we have people who are educated, who have been able to embrace the beauty of our faith and the truth. But if our mouths are shut and we don't have a passion to share and put back into the culture and inject the culture or what our faith is about, then why complain about it? That's all. Okay, that's it. That's good. I'm just gonna leave that be.
So, and Daniel as well, you've been involved in some new couple marriage issues that can be very hard to adopts. So, from your experience, what challenges do families starting out have in choosing to be informed in their conscience in their marriages when everything's so new and trying to start off in this culture when the culture tends to want to attack the family?
Yeah, great point. The culture doesn't support the families. And along the lines of what's been discussed here already, I think an important point to make is priorities, which is also what we teach in marriage prep. In life, there's a lot of good things, just like in politics, in both parties, there's a lot of good things, but we have to prioritize, right? And if as Catholics we follow Christ, certain things are bigger priorities than others. And having the right priorities makes all the difference of, are we going to have a flourishing marriage, a flourishing family life, a flourishing country, a flourishing society, culture? Or are we going to have the wrong priorities and then everything breaks down? Along the lines, our faith informs us that ultimately evil is nothing created. It's just Satan putting the wrong priorities in front of others. And then we get into trouble. We see that from the beginning, Adam and Eve with the first couple, and the trouble with the first couple created trouble in society. So priorities is huge. We teach it at marriage prep, and I think it's applicable in all areas of life.
So when we have a document, we create a document, and all these intellectually stimulating thoughts that most people don't read, quite honestly, how come the church doesn't just tell people who to vote for? Why do they have to go the far and just talk about issues? Why do we not talk about parties or politicians in debates? Why do they not speak from the pulpit? Father Matthew.
Well, I would say the minute you interfere, the minute you force human freedom, you actually destroy it. So if we as a church just told people, you have to do this, it doesn't take into account the learning process and therefore adhering in the heart of those things. If you decide to marry someone, you don't go to somebody and say, well, tell me about this girl, right? And here's a series of things about her, so you're going to marry her. That does not work. You have to get to know the thing personally. You have to delve into the life that you'd have with that person. And after that personal experience, making that free choice, not being told you're going to marry that person, now you have the real chance of living in freedom your life. And I think that's true about the church's teachings. The Lord didn't come and give us a list of rules to follow. He gave us a way of life to live. And I think this touches a little bit on some of the things that have said. Sometimes we think it's just between me and God. No, it's not between me and God. It's between me and God, and the second commandment is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is, as the Lord says, this is all the law summarized. And it starts there, and part of that is also respecting people's freedom, that they adhere freely to what the church has to say and what Christ has to say. And then you've entered the heart of that person. That person becomes creative themselves because Christ is in their heart. They start to flourish and help other people flourish. You can't force that. And you can't just come in and say, you have to do this. I don't think it would work to tell people what to do.
So if I got a lot of questions. I'm sure you guys do as well, right? So I'll start with one. So someone makes a decision that they're going to face the culture, right? And they have to cross the chasm, if you will, right? YG, what is that like?
Oh, man, that's tough. I would say I'm blessed to be able to travel around the country and speak to not just like-minded folks, but people who have strong disagreements with me. And I absolutely love talking to people with strong disagreements with me. And they ask me, well, YG, why do you believe in what you believe? And especially with our faith and with voting. And I ask them, okay, so first let's find out what we have in common. Because as you said, Father, trying to force people, if you got children, especially teenagers and adult children, and you're trying to tell adult children what to do, what they gonna do? They're gonna go to a complete different way, and you're gonna find yourself like, you so stupid right now. But they don't care, But what you have to do, you have to appeal to people. First, you got to find that level of a common understanding. And I say, okay, you believe in God, I believe in God. Okay, I love God, you love God. Okay, so the chasm is the way how you can shrink that is to find those points where we can both embrace Christ, and then you work your way from there. It's not a sledgehammer, as you say, Father. Okay, you have got to, and also you have to inject that love, but you also have to be very firm on why you believe what you believe. Okay, there are certain lines that you don't cross. It's like putting a line in the sand. Like when it comes to this particular issue, when it comes to the sanctity of life, when it comes to our faith, when it comes to this, when it comes to that. These are my parameters. These are why. I'm gonna educate you on why, and then you have to inject your own personal story of why. Because sometimes people don't like just facts and numbers. That's boring. But what people remember is your testimony. What people remember is your story on why you believe in what you believe. And then you plant that seed and you let God do the work. I would never come down and say, I'm bigger than you and I'm going to force you to do this. We're not authoritarians like that. But you plant that seed because the way how we were able to embrace this faith is someone saw us, someone shared the love of Christ with us in the faith. They planted that seed, they let us know where they stood, and then they walked away.
So Mary, you're not nearly the size of YG, but you were a warrior fighting for right to life for so long. Obviously, you have faced that confrontation for how long? And so,
Yeah, a long
what
time.
was obviously that can wear on someone. What's that like?
Well, it's difficult, but as YG said, there's a story. I remember my first time when I was faced with the facts of abortion that had just recently become legalized in Georgia, or in the United States, back in the early 70s. And we were in Ohio at the time, and someone came to our church and spoke about this issue. And I will never forget that moment. I walked out of that room saying, oh my God, they're killing babies. I didn't know it until then. I didn't realize it had happened. I missed it. I was just newly married and busy with my life. And that has never gone from my mind. And so that's what's always behind whatever I do. And so I used to be afraid to speak about it, but I used to have this one little part of Jeremiah where the Lord says, I will put the words in your mouth. I don't have it right with me, but I would read that. Every time I had to give a talk, I would read that before I gave, and I said, well, it's not me talking, it's the Lord is helping me to say whatever I need to say. So I'm not afraid about this. This is important. We have to speak out, if that's what we're called to do. We all have a different role, perhaps.
So Dr. Paul Fickman, you gave a speech one time on saints and martyrdom. I remember that. And so obviously, due to the disagreement, most of those saints were martyred because of opposition with the government. I think that's, I was thinking of all the saints that were martyred. I couldn't find one that wasn't martyred. Well, there were a couple, I think, that were individuals' cases, but most of them were confronting the political establishment of their day. So if we're not of the world, how does our role in government contribute to our holiness?
All right. So the same way our role in the family contributes to our holiness. Our children, I wrote an article one time that said, scraped or scrubbed, that was the title. It was about how one way or another your children are going to rub up against you. And you can either let it scrub you clean, or you can let it annoy you and send you the other way. The same kind of thing in government. We, by facing opposition, doing it with integrity, doing it with charity, it calls forth certain things in us. Some things that we have to reject, the kind of rage, the anger, the desire to get back. Others that we need to embrace to be able to, it can press us to see these people who disagree with us so strongly about things that we care about so much, to see that they're sons and daughters of God too, and He loves them and He wants them to see this light. And so I think one of the traps in politics that we have to avoid, and by avoiding it, it helps us to become holy, is not to give in to the anger, not to give in to the terror, the fear, not to give in to all those things that the enemy would try to speak into our minds, but instead to just stand and stand with integrity, and to love the people we're disagreeing with and opposing.
Who's the first saint you can think of that set that example?
Well, St. Stephen, the proto-martyr, yeah. So of course, and that was, as much religious authorities as it was political authorities, more religious authorities. But in the same thing, he spoke very, very bravely. In the book of Acts, we have what he said, knowing that what was going to happen to him. And yet, what a great example, as they're stoning him to death, and as he's dying, he imitates Jesus on the cross by saying, Father, don't hold this against them. Don't hold this against them. So he forgave his enemies even though they were doing that. And some of us, to be honest, might end up in a similar situation. I've always thought throughout my life, my Christian life, that maybe it would come to that someday. I haven't given up that sense that, at least in our children's generation, maybe in my own life, there'll be folks who are going to die for the faith.
Okay, and just to dovetail off of that, especially with this very, very sensitive topic of abortion, because this is the issue. When I go out and talk, the main pushback I get sometimes from women, and they'll say, well, how are you as a man even qualified to even discuss this? And I said, well, let me tell you, in 1999, I was in love with a young lady, and she was pregnant with twins. Now, we were not living a godly lifestyle. We were not. But she was pregnant with my twins, and I loved them very, very much. And I say, hey, and we got into an argument. And the only thing I knew is I said, look, you got a meeting with the doctor on Monday. I'll come pick you up. We'll put this argument down, and I'll pick you up. Well, I called to go pick her up. She didn't pick up the phone. I called on Tuesday. She didn't pick up the phone. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 7 days went by. And she did not pick up the phone. But on the last day, she picked up the phone. And I said, well, how'd the doctor's visit go? And she said, well, YG, the doctor's visit went fine, but I didn't go to that one. I said, well, how are the babies? And she said, well, your babies are dead because I killed them. And she said, I killed them because my friends told me the best way to hurt a man is to kill his children. And so let's just say I was broken for a while, and then when I was telling the ladies this, they got quiet, just like this, because they were upset at what happened, just like I was. But then the good thing about when you talk about the forgiveness aspect and the love of Christ, that only the grace of God can give this. Many years later, she saw that I was speaking at a particular place. And she saw me and she said, I just need 5 minutes of your time, YG. I need to talk to you. I said, I don't want to hear anything you have to say. You killed my kids. I don't want to have nothing you have to say. But she said, I need 5 minutes of your time. And we went into a coffee shop, and I sat down, and the Holy Spirit came over me. I had to let that brokenness and that hatred go. And she said, YG, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I killed our kids, because now I can't have any more children, but I am an advocate for pro-life, and I help give women options not to do that. And only thing I could do was hug her. She said, please forgive me. And I did, and that's when I became pro-life. And when I tell that story to people, then they understand why I have every right to feel the way I feel, because I'm a father. I'm a father of 7 adult children. 2 are in heaven and 3 are in heaven. And I got every right to love my children just as much as anybody, but this is why this is so important, because even they saw the horror of that situation. Those barriers went down, and then we were able to have a conversation. But if I would have went at them with a sledgehammer, like, chick, how the word you gonna tell me I don't have it right? That's the wrong approach. I told the story, we showed the forgiveness aspect, and now the hearts and the minds were ready to receive, and now we can at least have a conversation.
So Patrick, psychology again. What is it that people might have as a barrier intellectually or psychologically to be open to a faith like ours?
Yeah, I think, any sort of preconceived notions that they might have about the faith, that, the church is against this or this or this, whatever it might be. Personally, I think a lot of woundedness comes into people's lives, and that they act out of that woundedness unbeknownst to them even, that there's deep hurts there that keep them separated from God ultimately, right? It's whether it might be shame or hurt, right? There's that natural desire to push away God, because when I come into contact or come into relationship with God, I am laid bare, right? I see my woundedness, I see my hurt, and I'm forced to confront it, right? So ultimately, I think it most likely boils down to woundedness.
And Daniel, do you see some fear with regards to teaching new couples about NFP and things like that?
Oh, absolutely. As a dovetail off of Patrick, probably the church's teaching on human sexuality is probably the number one reason people have some issue with the church. The church is the one institution that stands alone, really, on the fullness of the yes of God's love and God's understanding of Holy Trinity of love, life, and sexuality. It's a challenge, but following the master, we're not going to be better than the master. You just have to be faithful in talking about God's big yes, to help people understand the beauty of his designs. And back to what I was saying, put him as your number one priority in his ways.
So a lot of this hurt that comes from a word that we use as Catholics, but not used very often in the culture, which is sin, right? And so our culture doesn't like to discuss sin, especially as it relates to politics. But sin was the reason Christ came to die for us, and so that we may have eternal life. So when one goes to vote, is there a danger of sin if one votes without an informed conscience? Dr. Matthew.
Well, there's such a thing the church teaches about, which is the common good, right? And I would say the common good is really talking about the common charity, that is the common love between everyone and everyone cooperating with everyone else to make life as beautiful as it could be, right? We remember that we're made in the image of the Trinity, therefore we're social creatures, as that God himself is 3 persons who live in concert and love with each other. We live in a society that, if it were to be fully Christian, would be a society full of love. Right? Sin is somehow the negation of love, and it starts to put a barrier between us and others. And I can see a lot of times we try and defend ourselves, saying I didn't offend love, but we do. So one of the first and most important steps is to admit we're all sinners. It's the first step of reconciliation. The second step is, in a certain sense, the easier step. It's to go out and love others and teach others to love, right? if we're going to make people happy, or I would say joyful. See, happy is an idea that's very momentary. From the word happen, it happened, right? So if I'm happy if I have an ice cream. I'm joyful if I have a friend, because it's something that lasts. And that's really all the church and Christ is proposing. It's that we live in the image of the Trinity and an image of everyone loving each other. And sin is the obstacle to love. It's what we haven't done. That's why sin is nothing. It's what we haven't done. And so, as citizens of a country, we're required to go out and try and bring the love of God to the entire culture, to the entire nation, and to the entire world. And America is a very good country. We are the country that probably gives more charity towards other countries than any place in the world. So I strongly believe that we are a loving country. That doesn't mean we don't have our problems. And this is a big problem, because it's going to hurt the people who sin. That's what we're really worried about. We're worried about the people who get hurt doing something that hurts themselves. And they know it when they do it. I hear confessions all the time. They come, and when they can admit that they've done something wrong, they're full of joy. It's amazing, because God never pushes them away. He's always ready to embrace that person. And then that person, like I said before, that person now can become a motor of love in the rest of his society. And he must, because that's what God is. God is not passive. God is active. And that's I believe how grace works, how charity works. And maybe that's in a certain sense what the faith is. I don't know if I answered your question, but
Well, it starts, so our activity in politics, but let's bring it home. Mary, all right? So, tough question. In today's polarizing environment, many Catholics find themselves in families where viewpoints are vastly different. What does a Catholic do if members of the family wish to vote against church doctrine? And is it better to keep that peace and say nothing, or do you educate them? What have you been dealing with right to life? I'm sure you're in the front of that.
Well, that sometimes dealing with the family can be a little trickier than dealing with people you might meet just at a meeting or something. But we're still obliged to speak of what we believe. And so, if we have the opportunity to talk about it, we should. We need to. We must. So it can be difficult, and you talked about the opportunities for sin. Some people may not have had the opportunity or taken the opportunity to learn what the church teaches on some of these issues, or as Daniel said, some of them don't agree with everything the church teaches, and so that can be difficult. And it really is, it depends on the particular circumstances, but again, when you mentioned priorities, that's another thing this document talks about. It very clearly says that all the issues, and there are multitudes of issues that face us in public policy. There's many more than we could ever begin to talk about in one evening, but all the issues don't have the same weight. And so in the document, that one of the things that I found very helpful is the bishops, in their wisdom, they said there are priorities, and the preeminent issue is the abortion issue right now. But that does not excuse us from ignoring the other issues. And that's where it's tricky. That's where it can be tricky, because there are so many issues. We have to learn what the church teaches about these issues. We have to understand that they have different weights. It's all based, though, and this is what I think is so beautiful about it, it's all based on the dignity of the human person. All the issues have to do with that. And if we remember that, the dignity of the human person, every issue you want to affect is touched on that in some way or another.
That's a great segue because I want to get into the issues next. All right, so this is great. Did you guys enjoy this? Awesome. So let's go to question one, Scott, if you mind. You had it up there. I saw you moved it. Okay. So we're going to get into some of these issues as it is. And the first one, dealing with issues, sometimes people think that we shouldn't be involved at all anyway because of the name of separation of church and state. So that term, separation of church and state, is thrown around a lot in our political debate. And what exactly is the proper understanding of that from a Catholic perspective? And I'll give you that one.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
You wrote 54 books, you can handle it.
Yeah, and I taught a college course actually on church-state issues once. We have to understand first where the wording comes from. Originally, it was the one we know best is that from Thomas Jefferson writing a letter in 1802 to the Danbury Baptist Association. He was responding to a letter they had written him about how they were afraid that the system that had been inherited from the colonies for the new republic, now the states, that they often had an established church, and that church was fully united with the government, was supported by the government. You were punished, or at least had penalties if you didn't belong to it, that kind of thing. The Puritans had that kind of system in New England. The Baptists were the ones who suffered most from it. That's why the colony of Rhode Island was founded. And so that was really the main issue. And he responds to them, and he talks about how there needs to be a wall of separation between church and state. And is talking about to the new Constitution and about in light of the First Amendment, and that the First Amendment then guarantees free exercise of religion and no establishment of religion. And so when we realize that, what we understand is that it had a very particular meaning then. It was even a long time before it ever got cited in like a Supreme Court case, but it had a very particular meaning, and that meaning was not that religious people and their religions are to stay out of the public square. The meaning was that the government is not to interfere in the church and make itself one with the church. And I think, to a large extent, our country's done a good job of that. But unfortunately, in more recent times, the idea has grown in a direction that was more like what happened in the French Revolution, and that is that the government should kind of rule over the religious establishment of the church and should begin to confine it in certain ways with the ultimate goal of getting rid of it, which Peter Berger, who was a great sociologist of religion back in the 1970s, noted that kind of secularist attitude that we ban religion from schools, from the public places, all that, basically is a form of secular Shintoism, in which secularism becomes the new religion and established and supported and defended and encouraged by the state, which is just as bad as making Catholics or Presbyterians or one of the others.
Right back to the original argument.
Yeah. So that's one of the things we have to be concerned about today and to stand against, this notion that to separate church and state means that Catholics and Christians and other people of faith cannot bring their faith into the public square and defend what they're talking about and why they are. And unfortunately, you have a lot of folks kind of taking that attitude right now.
Interesting. So, one of the, and by the way, if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to still write it on a note card and take it over to Scott. And also, you're watching online. Do we have any questions online at all yet? No?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so it's all me right now. All right.
Matt, can I add one more thing?
Yes, go ahead, please.
The other thing I think it's important to say is that even with a separation of church and state, the official organizations, that's different from separation of religion and politics. Because religion and politics both at some level deal with the most important issues of human life, they have to by their nature, there will be overlapping areas. You cannot totally separate religion from politics. You often heard, maybe not so much recently, but you can't legislate morality. Well, of course you can. Laws against murder and rape and all kinds of other things are legislated morality. The question is, the church, always St. Thomas Aquinas talked about how there are certain things that are wrong, that the government isn't able to make a law about. But there are certain things that are obviously, clearly, seriously wrong. And of course, the state has to be involved there. So you cannot separate religion and politics ultimately. On certain issues, you can, about whether policies, what we would call prudential judgments in the Catholic tradition, whether they follow the principles better, whether they have a better effect in following these principles. But in the end, you cannot totally separate those two, because they both get at the base of what it means to be human.
So one of the questions that we have here, we talked about abortion some, and that is to Catholics and to many, that is the predominant issue. But we're also encouraged to not be single issue voters. How do we reconcile those positions when we have someone that maybe, maybe one is, for abortion, and another one is for something else that's equally as drastic in some sense of just genocide? If you have left with choices, how do you make an informed decision? Father Matthew.
Well, we've said it before that there are certain priorities, and just like in the Declaration of Independence, there's an order given: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those three things are said in that order for a reason. Life leads to liberty, leads to the pursuit of happiness. And the bishop's new prologue in the latest the Voter's Guide, they put that preeminent value of life, because without it, there are no other values. There are no other, because you're not there to have them. And so that's why the church has wisely said this is the preeminent issue, because all other issues flow from life.
Okay, and I'm so happy we brought this up, because going around the country, and let's just say I was in a debate with a Black Lives Matter advocate, and she was going in, and she was like, this, that, and black people need this, and lives need this, black lives need this and that. And I said, well, I understand all of that is important, but how can anyone even deal with the issue if we're never even born? I said, if black lives truly matter, if they truly matter, then why is 48.5% of our children slaughtered in the womb? And imagine all that black brilliance, all of that black talent, all of that is completely destroyed. I said almost half of all black people living in the country right now have been slaughtered in the womb. And I said, and if we only got 6% of the population with black women, but yet we got 27.8% of the abortions in this country, and we've killed 22 million of us, then how in the hell do black lives matter? If you truly matter to me, I want to save your life. If you truly mean something to me, I want to nurture your life. I want you here so you can contribute to society. But how can we even have anything if someone's never born? So, at that moment, then she got back and just said, F you, YG. Okay? And I said, that's fine. Okay, but that is the preeminent issue right now. Because how can we even argue with anything if you ain't here? That's all I'm saying. So we need to look deeper into that. And I just always say it like that. Look, if you look at education, okay, let's just look at the education system. People who have lower levels of education are prone to more homelessness, to more violence, to more criminality. But the science even looked into people of lower education, especially poor women, have a 42% more chance of having an abortion. Because the education is low, they don't have the ability to adequately, provide for themselves. So now, with a lack of resources, with a lack of education, now you have no hope, you have no options, which lead to now you done got pregnant, you can't even take care of yourself, now you can't take care of this child, so now we lead to another death. And if you repeat the cycle over and over again, it comes to a genocide. So I will always say, Because of the situations, these issues coincide with each other. It's not a single topic issue. It all rolls together. So, like I said, if truly lives matter to you, then all the issues matter, but we can't even address those issues until we address the fact that we need to stop committing a mass genocide, period.
And I think the bishops also made the point that not just is it fundamental to all the issues, but it has to be a priority because of the extent of it in our society. It's something that is everywhere. It's so many numbers. It is a mass genocide. It's a Holocaust. It's a new Holocaust. So that's another reason why it has to be priority, not just because it is such a grave thing and it's the fundamental to all the other rights that we have, but the extent of it and the extent to which it has been covered over by language that robs it of its reality.
And I have to add, the United States abortion jurisprudence is terrible. This is one of the worst countries in the world for what is allowed with abortion. Abortion is really allowed right through to the end. And I've known this for years because of my work, but I think a lot of people in the United States were just recently brought to that was brought to their attention when they were talking about some of the late-term abortion problems that people never would believe. That was one thing I would find. People would not believe that when I would say that abortion is legal up until all 9 months. But the last few years that has been coming out in the news a little bit, and more people are saying, you mean a child can be born even or almost born and can still be legal? Yes. And so it's just amazing how bad the law is in the United States. We need, we've done a lot to help it, but it's still, there's a lot more to go, a lot more.
We do have a question from our audience.
Thank you, Matt.
Yes.
Yes, and some more divisive issues, actually. This is from Tim. What role, if any, does moral character and positive leadership attributes play in the candidate we should choose? Good question.
Do you want to direct it to someone?
Let's start with Father.
Well, I'd say it's definitely going to affect whether you vote for the person or not. You can't help that psychologically. If you don't like a person, it's probably going to affect whether you want to vote for that person or not. I would say the role of government is to create systems, the common good, as we call it. And since it's about that, a person should look to what are the systems that are going to be put in place by a particular platform or particular candidate. I understand that some people, maybe you don't like them. But I don't think it should be so important. Like, maybe I don't like the way a person looks. They have blonde hair. I don't like people with blonde hair, right? Okay, or I don't like New Yorkers, right? Or I don't like Southerners, or I don't like, that starts to be peripheral to the real issue, which is what are the systems going to be put in place that are going to affect the common good in the long term. Otherwise, we're being kind of childish about the way we make choices. I don't like the way they look, so I'm not going to vote for them. I don't like their attitude. Okay. And if those have something to say about the person, but I would still say, well, let's look at the systems, the laws, the governance, the common good that they want to put in place.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I'll go to confession for doing that. But on that line, with social media and the media the way it is, and everything that we're seeing on our phones and whatever that's hitting us all day long, just trying to generate those emotions to create a feeling. How do individuals overcome those emotions and that superficial decision-making that people are faced with every day? Why do you want to go to?
Yeah, since I'm in it, okay. Well, I'll tell people this. I'm gonna make this real simple. Okay, do not vote on the cult of personality. Okay, if you are looking for a 100% moral politician, you're gonna keep on looking until you dead and gone and gone to paradise. I'm telling you, I'm just being honest with you. Okay, I'm being real with you. Okay, I'm gonna keep this real. We real, right? We talking. Being in Washington and being in politics, I know a lot of these people you see on TV, on both sides of the aisle. And if you say, well, I don't like this particular politician because he said this and he tweets this, or they do this and that do that, and I don't like this person, but this person over here, man, every time I see them on TV, they so swell. Let me tell you something. It's like actors, Hollywood actors, okay? People put on the front, okay? They have teams, maybe hundreds of people who are positioning them to say certain things, polling different answers to say to people. It is not authentic. It is TV. It is entertainment. So the only thing that you can count on when you vote is to vote your value system. Okay? Don't go off of who you think you like this person, that person, just because someone is more eloquent with their speech and able to deliver something in a nice way that you like, that's not going to tick you off, that's not going to trigger you. That person could be selling you a bit of goods because in the background, that person is an SOB and is doing all kind of things, all kind of dirt, and it comes up later on after you done elected a meeting. Or you got a person who is harsh, brash, maybe sometimes say stupid stuff, but you know where they're coming from, okay, and you know what you get. But no politician is perfect. I'm telling you right now, if that's what you're looking for, then I'll sell you a bridge in space and get rich off of you. But if you want to look at it, vote your values. What do you believe? What politicians line up mostly with your value system, with what you believe, who's trying to fight for you, trying to be your voice? Don't hold it against them if they are not as charismatic as someone else. But look at the inner. Stop looking at the outward aesthetic and look at who this person really is by their voting record, what they represent, what interests they represent, and what agenda they're trying to push.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question again. All right, so based on that, obviously you might have individuals that come and try to do this stuff, but what about the systemic aspect of this? Is religious freedom under a systemic attack? Not just by individuals or just the culture, but maybe by a coerced effort by certain individuals, certain companies, things like that.
Yes.
I'll leave it out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
There are a number of instances. You were talking about that before. This has been a problem in our country, much worse in other countries, I have to say. But there have been specific instances that have come up. Some have been addressed, others haven't. But I mean, I could name a few. Right after the Affordable Care Act was passed, there was a good long time before the whole problem with the requirement for contraceptive that had to be provided. Some of that has been addressed, some hasn't. In some places, they're still fighting that. We still have the Little Sisters of the Poor who are trying to go through the courts and get their problems settled. So that's been a problem. Some people, we talk about marriage, and there have been the problem with people trying to follow their faith with regard to not being involved in a sacrament that they don't consider a sacrament. There have been problems with church-affiliated adoption agencies that had to go out of business because the church policy with regard to same-sex marriage. Those are just a few, and there's many, many more. But religious freedom is an issue, definitely an issue in our country.
But the science, so many scientists say that's all the end-all be-all, and yet they seem to adopt that and attack us with what they call science. Like man-made climate change, for example, is settled science that many believe by many and not accepted by many others. And so what is the Catholic Church's position in dealing with science and faith and reason to come to these conclusions? And maybe counteract these, attacks on us, or have a conversation or dialogue.
Well, I'm an electrical engineer, I studied all the science. They made us, right? And I think often, okay, see, I think you have to watch out that the scientific method is actually being used. Okay, that means it's repeatable every time. So many times claims are made about science that they have not shown something to be repeatable and conclusive, right? So a thing goes from a theory to a law, right, in science. And I think a lot of times those things are misused because they don't really follow the scientific method when they come to they claim there's a conclusion. So I many times doubt the science or the suggested things that things are finished from a scientific point of view. Okay, because being, again, in science, one of the main things is mathematics. In mathematics, if you don't take a certain variable into consideration, so x plus y equals 0, right? What if there's a z and you didn't take it into consideration? The answer you get from x and y are going to be wrong because you didn't take something else into consideration. And that's one of the things about science is science many times realizes later that there's another variable. And that's why many times science has come to the wrong conclusions because they later on discover other variables, right? And particularly in climate, there are so many variables. And to say that you have a handle on all those things, I don't believe it. There's the sun, there's the magnetic field, there's all kinds of things going on. Volcanoes, carbon dioxide. Sure, you'll be able to say there's some impact of this thing, but have you studied all the variables? So that'd be my claim. And the church doesn't make a conclusion on that because the church's job is not science in that sense. The church is going to lead you and give you value orientation. It's not going to tell you to believe something contrary to science. It's just not the role of the church.
Well, shouldn't the church, though, defend its position if science attacks its elements of faith?
Science will never, there's nothing in science that is contrary to faith.
Well, explain faith and reason then.
What? Okay.
Well, I would say scientists often do that, but pure science, or science well done. Science can often be overreaching. When you have a scientist who studies cosmology, the origin of the universe, and that kind of thing, and then says, well, we can explain all these things by random processes, therefore there is no God. That's far beyond anything that
Yeah.
science could ever
See,
make a claim.
God, if God is if you say, well, I can prove there's no God. No, you can't, because at least in our conception of God, he stands outside of the creation. You can't test him. The way science works is you throw something at a thing and see what bounces off, right? And then however it bounces off, you start to learn how that thing reacts to a stimulus, right? You can't do that to God because he stands outside of the creation. There can never be, ever, a proof by science that there's no God because it stands outside of the system that it claims to have power to consider, right? So that's ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous.
What we
Okay?
call scientism is the notion that basically science is like a religion, that you accept by faith that science has all the answers. That science understands the human person perfectly, that reason by itself is enough. But all you have to do is, I'm an historian, you look at the history of science, that's part of what you're saying. Science itself, God bless the scientists, all for them, and they've done so much for us. But the history of science itself shows again and again, the paradigm gets overturned. They're all convinced this is true, and then boom, something else, more factors come in. And so what it means is that we can't put our ultimate faith in science, and where science makes claims contrary to our faith, then if we were to say, well, then science has got to rule, basically we're making science our religion.
So, so what about those moderate positions, right? So let's say someone is someone said a fellow Catholic recently told them that they were pro-life and they believe that abortion should remain legal. We just need to work on reducing the number of abortions. Is that an acceptable Catholic position?
No. No. And I'm going to tell you why. We got 10 people right here in this, over here. And murder is wrong. But it'd be all right if I killed 3 of them. It's messed up for the 3 that died. I'm just saying, like I said, are we going to be real or not in here, okay? And as a person, and I know y'all want to get into this, but a person who has experienced this, a lot of these folks who talk about these platitudes have not lived this, okay? I have buried a child before, my oldest. I know what it's like for a child to die. It hurts like hell. I wish I could save that life. Then when my 2 twins were killed, I never had an opportunity to be a father to those children, to give them that leadership, to give them that love, to give them that nurturing that I would have loved to been able to share. That moments was robbed from me. And if somebody said, well, it's only just those 2 twins, but what if it was your children or someone that you care about? Because if you have that mentality, what if a psychopath come and pick out a family member of yours and say, hey, I'm just going to kill this person because they don't matter? Well, they matter to me, and it's still murder. So I know this is sensitive, but every life, and the church teaches that all life is precious. Even the most simplest and the smallest. Christ wants us to protect life. He's not asking us to pick and choose whose life is worth more than anybody else's. He says he wants us to protect, and we need to cherish life. And that's what our church stands for, and that's what we need to do. And I'm going to shut up and let somebody else talk.
Well, let's take another issue too. So we're talking about life and opportunity. And so obviously we got a lot of people that want to come into this country who are not citizens, but are trying to immigrate here. But the church believes that all life is valuable. But what about those that want to cross the border? What is the government's responsibility for that? Who wants to take that one? Immigration?
I'll jump on that one too.
I would say the church would agree that as a general principle that a country has a right to its borders. And it has a right to limit or permit immigration as the common good for that people. It allows. That is the debate that so some people are going to argue more people come in, other people are going to argue less people come in. That's what our legislature is for, to have that debate, make those decisions, and if those decisions are made and someone wants to change them, then the debate can start again. But that's what our representatives are supposed to do. We vote for a representative, they represent us before Congress or the Senate, and laws are determined, and that's the common good that we all adhere to. And I don't think the church would have any problem with that. So that'd be my comment on that.
There are also church documents. I wrote a piece about this one time. If you look and see what the full picture of what the church has said, is that those who are immigrants to another country must obey the laws of the land to which they go. People don't want to hear that, but that's also church teaching. It is.
So,
okay. I got to. I live this, okay? Like I said, a lot of people who do all this talking they don't experience it. So I got a couple of friends of mine who believe that, people should just be able to come in, okay? That, countries should not have any borders. So I decided to go to their house at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I knocked on their door. And it was like, YG, what are you doing here? I said, let me in. See, I told you I make stuff real simple, okay? And I said, let me in. I'm hungry. Give me all your food and cook a brother up. And he was like, are you out of your mind? It's 3 o'clock in the morning. You've been knocking on the door now. The baby done woke up. The baby crying. It took me and my wife forever to put that baby to sleep. I said, look, you said that the country should have no borders, that we don't need laws of protection, and there should be no boundaries. So if there's no boundaries on the country, then practice what you preach, brother. Open the door. No, he didn't open the door. He told me, YG, if you don't go home, I'm going to call the cops on you. And I said, exactly. The door is the wall. I'm sorry. I'm going to be quiet. I promise. I promise.
So obviously, we have other issues as well with regards to family and and rights that people might have. So,
one last thing about immigration. I heard Cardinal Burke make an excellent point that I haven't heard anywhere else. And that was, why all the focus on the U.S. border? There's some people seek a better life here, and that's wonderful. And sometimes they're escaping horrible situations, and we want to help them. But what about all those poor people in the poorer countries that can't escape? Why all the focus on our border instead of focusing also on helping the governments create a country that people want to desire to stay in? Yes. God forbid, what if our country falls apart? Where's the next United States we can go to? Hopefully that won't happen. Hopefully other countries can become as free and prosperous and liberty-loving and economically wealthy to provide jobs for everyone and all across the world, so people want to stay where they are. That would be wonderful too.
Well,
there needs to be more effort.
We have a great example here at the parish. We have our Haiti Reach ministry, and we've picked one community in Haiti, and we've tried to do as much as we can to build a school to help with the crops, to provide education, to help the church itself to have the things it needs. We're trying to create a good life there for them, and I would agree that there's much more we can do on that level as a country, as a church. We can do more, and I think that takes organization.
So going to education, which is a great point. I'm glad you made that segue. What is our position with regards to education here? School choice, vouchers, homeschooling, or our public education system that we currently have. I'll let our psychiatrists and family guys.
Sure. I mean, we understand that family is the central cell of society, and so parents have the primary. They are the primary educators of their children, right? And so they are given the right to choose and to decide where they would want their child to go for school.
Are they really given that choice, though?
That's the church's position.
Okay. So that's the question. I mean, are they given that choice right now in today's current environment?
No, they're not. Can I jump in? Okay. Once again, people who come up with this stuff do not live the consequences of it. Let's just say I was in inner city Atlanta, and I was doing a talk there, and we was talking about school choice. And a lot of the schools are very underperforming, okay? The teachers aren't teaching. There's a lot of crime in the schools, and there's absolutely no hope. A lot of the kids drop out of school and they get locked up. Okay, this is where the education system is important and why school choice is important. So I say that to some of the folks that live out in the suburbs, in Alpharetta and these guys, I said, look, if you was in a situation where your family and you had to send your child to an underperforming school where the teachers honestly don't give a ding dong, and the education is so low, and your child is constantly being threatened with violence and given no hope, if somebody was to give you just a sliver of an opportunity to improve the odds of your child being able to surpass your financial situation, for an opportunity for your child to have some hope, to remove all of these negative elements that keep constantly perpetuating itself, would you take that chance? And everybody with a brain all says, yes, they would, because now you've made it real for people. A lot of people speak in platitudes because they don't understand. But when you make it real, when you have to live that and you seeing your child is suffering, and maybe you've grown up that way as well, and you wish you had an opportunity, and now all of a sudden now you got one chance to move that baby, to give them an opportunity for a real future where they don't fall in the same traps as everybody else, that right there is worth it. Period. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet.
That's why we're here.
It is an issue, school choice is an issue, and the church, does support many different options for school choice. And in some states and in some parts of the country, they have better opportunities than others. We have some here in Georgia, but it's probably could be improved a lot. But that's definitely a state-by-state issue, not necessarily a federal issue.
What is the status of all of our Catholic schools in this country right now compared to 10, 20, 30 years ago?
I'm not sure. Paul, you know?
I've taught at a Catholic college, but not a Catholic school before. I do think one of the big challenges of Catholic schools is maintaining Catholic identity. There are economic reasons for that, other reasons. As we've had fewer religious staffing schools who used to make almost no money at all, and now, understandably, lay people who have families, and the salaries have to be higher. There's pressure on the people getting more people in, and if they're not Catholic, it's okay. And then once they're there, well, we don't want to offend somebody. If they're not Catholic, maybe we shouldn't have. It actually happened in some schools, shouldn't have a crucifix on the door. Maybe we shouldn't pray a Hail Mary or that kind of thing. So there are economic reasons as well as in some places a loss of faith. But I would say Catholic identity is probably the biggest challenge. And we've got good stuff going on here in Atlanta for sure. But
So Catholic identity, I'm sorry, Patrick, but
Just one other comment. I think that's a great point that Paul made. And going back to YG's comment, I think, traditionally Catholic schools have always been for the poor, right? You look on the Eastern Coast where, a lot of Catholic schools were established. They were always meant to serve the poor. And then unfortunately now, because they're not staffed by religious, the cost of tuition is very high. And so that limits the people that can attend that. And that's something that we could certainly do better, I think, as a church, as a community, as a nation, right, to make Catholic school more affordable and reachable for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Huge benefit.
Hey, Matt, can I jump in with
Yeah, go ahead,
a
please.
question from our audience here? Another one from Peter. The church stands for truth. If our culture is immersed in media which misrepresents the truth about candidates, morality, the right to life, doesn't the church have an obligation to present, educate, correct the truth more than it does now?
There's a general principle that the individual ought to seek the truth. Okay, so it's not only a matter of the church teaching the truth, but the individual also has a requirement of himself to seek out the truth. So those two things meet. The church can say a lot of things, but if the people are not seeking truth, it's in vain we present it. So you have to have an open heart to receive the truth, and you should go out and look for it. So I think that's part of the answer here. To put it all on the church goes, again, what I said before, it goes against the thing of freedom. Freedom requires the open heart to hear what is offered.
I think one of the spirits of that question, though, is, and you hear this all the time, we're a silent majority, right? There's a lot of noise on the other side that doesn't speak those truths. So it's almost a frustration. How do we present ourselves with the same level of volume, or communicate as loudly almost?
But my feeling is, it's another thing that I felt was very evident in the document, is the role of the church and the bishops. Their role is teaching. Their role is to present the values in the teaching, and we as the laity, we're to act on that. We're to take the action. So if there's silence, is it the lady you spoke to at your meeting, the one who was not talking to anyone? Is it the people who are choosing only one source of information? Is it people who aren't answering when they see something that's not true? So it's not always the job of the church, it's the job of the church.
Good point. So I got one more, if you don't mind.
Real quick, Scott, you said you had 5-minute warnings, so how many words is that, for questions or for the entire thing?
You can wrap up in the next 5 minutes, and then we'll, let anybody have any final words.
All right, so.
Can I do one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
I hope this doesn't go 5 minutes. So there's another huge topic, right? Socialism is being discussed in our country right now, and I've seen this posted a number of times. Jesus was a socialist. How do you respond to that?
Historian.
We only got 5 minutes.
The church, but we can make it quick. The church has said again and again, papal encyclicals and others, condemning socialism, Marxism in particular, and all you have to do is just not be ignorant of history. That's all you have to do. I once had a graduate school at a school here that I will talk about, where a class where there was a professor, pressing for Marxism, that kind of thing, in a religion course, and I finally said, don't you realize that there's not a single country that has gone that direction in the history of the world that wouldn't right away take away your right to dissent or say any of this stuff? It never works. So there are kind of two things. One, the church has condemned it. It has always been the enemy. And the early church was not socialist because it was not a government forcing the system on people. People were willingly giving their things to each other and to the poor. That would be my short answer, I guess.
Well, the church has always said that there's a balance between subsidiarity and solidarity, right? Those two things are moving situations. At times, for example, during the pandemic, the country might have to be helped by the government when people are out of work, and here you give them money, right? You might have a debate about that, but there's a time when there are people at need. On the other side, subsidiarity, that it should be left to the smallest organization in the country, or like the family or the individual, as much freedom as possible for that person to live out their life without being organized by a higher power in the society. So there's always going to be those balances, So if you're a libertarian, you say, I should be able to go down the freeway 100 miles an hour. And you're against my freedom by not letting me do that. Okay, so yes, government can come in and say, for the common good, we are going to put limits on you. You can only go 70, it means you're going to go 90, but on the 400 or whatever, right? So there is a balance that's always being played out in cultures between government bigger or smaller. The problem is when one of those two disappears. If the freedom completely disappears, that's what you call tyranny of the government. And you have chaos if there is no government. So there's two values there. And so that's not socialism, but this is the problem of a society. Trying to understand in this situation, how much power do you give a government? How much power do you take away from a government? For the common good, because it goes back to what is the good of the people, not what is the good of the government. The government is at the service of the people, not the people at the service of the government.
I want to end it on that. That's a great quote. So I think our time is over. I want to thank all of you in our audience for coming to this, and thank you for our panel. Father Matthew, thank you for having us here at St. Brendan's, and Mary Boyer and Patrick Metz and YG Nightstorm. At YouTube, the Nightstorm Nation with a Y. And then Paul Thigpen, thank you, Dr. Paul, and Daniel West as well. So remember, early voting has begun in many states, and wherever you are, take that opportunity to vote. Go out there and vote. Election day is November 3rd. And God bless the USA.
Are we off?
I'm not sure.
We good?
Are we off?
We're off.